June of 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus believed they had found their dream home. The house stood at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey, a beautiful 6-bedroom property on a quiet, tree-lined street in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in America. It was elegant, historic, and perfect for the family they were building. The Broadduses had just spent around $1.3 million on the house, and for a brief moment, everything seemed ideal. But before they even moved in, something happened that would turn their dream into a nightmare. One evening, Derek Broaddus was at the house finishing some painting and minor renovations. Before leaving, he checked the mailbox. Inside was a white envelope addressed simply to the new owner. At first, it looked harmless, maybe a welcome note from a neighbor. But the moment Derek opened it and began to read, that feeling disappeared. The letter began politely, almost strangely old-fashioned. "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard," it said. Then the tone shifted. The writer claimed that their family had been watching the house for decades. They said their father had watched it in the 1960s. Their grandfather had watched it in the 1920s. And now it was their turn. The writer called themselves the Watcher. At first, Derek thought it had to be some kind of prank, but the contents of the letter became darker with every line. The Watcher asked whether the house had found what is in its walls. Yet, they wanted to know if the Broaddus children would play in the basement. They referred to the children as young blood and asked if there would be young blood in the house soon. The writer even seemed to know details about the family, including the fact that they had children. Despite the family not having fully moved in yet, Derek and Maria were horrified. Instead of celebrating their new home, they went to the police. The Westfield Police Department took the letter seriously enough to advise the family not to tell the neighbors right away. Officers reportedly suggested the Broadduses avoid moving anything into the house until they knew more. The letter had no return address, and it had been processed through a postal facility in northern New Jersey, making it difficult to trace. Whoever wrote it clearly wanted to remain invisible, but the nightmare was only beginning. Days later, another letter arrived. This one made it even clearer that the writer was actively watching the house. The Watcher mentioned construction workers and renovations happening inside. They seemed to know that the family had not fully moved in yet. They referred again to the children, asking for their names and ages. The writer described the house almost like a living thing, saying that 657 Boulevard had been the subject of my family for decades and asking whether the Broadduses were going to fill the house with the young blood I requested. That line changed everything. This no longer felt like a prank. It felt personal, it felt targeted, and most of all, it felt dangerous. The Broadduses began to fear that someone nearby could see into the house, watch their routines, and track their children. Every ordinary thing suddenly became suspicious. Every neighbor became a possible suspect. Every parked car, every person walking by, every curtain moving at night, all of it felt threatening. The family's anxiety grew worse when they began looking more closely at the people around them. One neighbor reportedly had a habit of sitting in a lawn chair facing the Broaddus house. Another family, according to later reports, had an adult son with a fascination for dark video games and disturbing themes. Some neighbors seemed unusually curious about the family's renovation plans. Others had lived on the block for decades and knew the history of the house in intimate detail. None of this proved anything, but in the mind of a terrified family, every odd behavior became part of a larger pattern. The police investigation struggled almost immediately. There were no fingerprints of value on the envelope, no obvious DNA breakthrough, no surveillance footage revealing the sender. Detectives interviewed neighbors and explored multiple theories, but nothing led to a clear answer. One of the most obvious questions was whether the previous owners had received similar letters. The family who sold the home to the Broadduses, the Woods family, eventually admitted they had received one strange letter shortly before moving out, but they said it was the only one they had ever gotten in more than 20 years of living there, and they had thrown it away. That revelation only deepened the mystery. If the Woods family had received a letter, then the Watcher's obsession with 657 Boulevard had likely started before the Broadduses bought the house. But why had the letter suddenly intensified? Was it because of the sale? Was the writer angry about change? Protective of the house? Mentally unstable? Or was the entire thing an elaborate performance designed to terrorize one specific family? As fear turned into obsession, the Broadduses hired private investigators, consulted former FBI profilers, and considered every possibility. One theory was that a jealous neighbor didn't want the house renovated. Another was that someone had a fixation on the architecture or the status of the property. There were even suspicions that the whole thing could somehow be connected to someone inside the broader social circle of the family, someone who knew they had children and knew when they were at the house.